This is one of the examples I did on Monday night, just so you can see it's the same process of what we've already done. Let me turn off my motion blur. Okay, so the idea with this one is that if I look at just one of these using this solo, is that it scales up like this, and then to go away, it scales down like that. That's all it's doing, and it's just rotated. And then I duplicated it and stacked them like that. And then I also, if you look here, I also offset each one of these, so you get this kind of neat effect. With every single transition that we do, they should be the same thing. There's 0 things on the screen, completely blank. Something comes on the screen, fills the entire screen, and then goes away, okay? So if they don't do that, that's not a transition that we can use. If you are curious if you have covered the screen, you can hit this transparency button, and if you look, you can kind of see very closely that there's actually like one line of pixels that I missed. So maybe this layer here just needs to be scooted down a little bit, which means that one needs to be scooted down, which means that one is probably good. Yep, okay. Okay, and you can see those checkerboards. I should see checkerboards at the beginning and checkerboards at the end if I've done it correctly. And then right in the center where we have the full screen coverage, we have nothing happening there. Here's one similar to the one I did here. Let me turn motion blur off again. I guess I'll just let it do the same. Okay, so that's when I went to. And then I'll turn motion blur off so this goes quicker. Okay. So you see very similar stuff. It's just different designs, different ways to do that, that thing. So I'm going to go back to this classes, which is there. All right, so we kind of talked about that with that one. Let me just delete it and make a new one. "32 seconds at most." There we go. All right, so with this one, I want to focus on doing something that's more pattern-based. If I had one shape that I created and I wanted to, let's say, loop that shape or have that shape appear throughout my entire animation, what I don't want to do is do it once and then have to duplicate it and move it and then duplicate it and move it and duplicate it and move it. What I want to do is have it set up so that that animation is kind of like an instance. It's kind of like locked to its own thing, and then I can move that around and duplicate it, and if I change it, I go back to my original one and change it. If I duplicate a layer of an animation and then I decide, oh, I want to change this, I have to go to each one of those layers and change each one of those layers, and that's a huge hassle. If you know anything about me, I don't like to work. Okay. So we're going to do something, we're going to kind of double team this one. So I'm going to show shapes, and I'm also going to show this thing, okay? So up to now, we've been doing this, creating a new solid. You'll see there's a new shape layer. I've never used this because I've just gone into the shape layers right here, okay? So I'm going to use this ellipse, and I'm going to draw a circle. After Effects sucks for snapping. Illustrator is great. If you move something, it's like smart guides come up, it's like locks everything. After Effects is no good for that, no bueno. So let's go to title and action safe. The only reason I use this is because I get that little plus sign right in the middle. And then I'm going to click and drag. And then if this was Photoshop or Illustrator, what would you hold down to draw from the center? Shift to keep it straight, right? And then Alt to drag it from the center. Because After Effects just says FU, no, it's Control, okay? So Control and Shift will be the two hotkeys we would use to draw a perfect circle and to bring it out from the center. So we will drag this to about there. All right. What I want to do with this, we're going to do two with this circle, is the first one, I'm going to have it kind of bubble up and then like pop, basically. Okay, that's what I want to have it do. So I'm going to go to the fill like it is like this, no stroke. Even though there's a color on the stroke, because there is a 0 pixel, it doesn't show it. So I'm fine with that. So I'm going to take this shape and I'm going to go to scale, and I'm going to put the scale at 0. Now I drew it big so that when I scale it up, I know like 100 is where I want to go, okay? So I'm going to scale it from 0. I'm going to go up to like 8 frames or so, put this at 100. There we we go. And then I'm going to do the same stuff I did before. There's my easy ease. There's our speed graph. There we go. Perfect. Nice and fast at the end. And now what I need to do is I need to pop the bubble here. And the way that I'm going to get it to pop is I'm going to use what we did on the first assignment, or what I showed in the first assignment, which is a track mat. If I have one layer and another layer and I want to use one as a clipping mask, in After Effects we call it a track mat. So I'm going to duplicate this animation. So I just duplicated the layers. You guys seem to like to work, some of you. You Control-C, Control-V. There is a Control-D hotkey. Don't waste your time with that Control-C, Control-D crap. Cool. So track mat, whatever is on the bottom is what gets seen. Whatever is on the top is what gets invisibled. So I'm going to make this one my top one that's going to be invisible. I'm going to go to my track mat and I'm going to say alpha inverted. Okay? Now what that means is where this shape exists and where this shape exists, it's invisible. Where these two don't exist together, then I get to see that other shape, that bottom shape, okay? So this one will be visible when this one is not on top of it, okay? Now to show you that, I'm going to take this layer and just scoot it down a bit. Okay, so what should happen, the bubble gets bigger right here, then the other one starts coming in, making the other one invisible. That's what should happen. If I'm not high this morning, that should work. Perfect, it works. Boom, boom, okay? Now, my delay of where I put those two layers is how fast that would happen. If the layers are very close to each other, I'll get more of like a single popping effect. Now I'm getting more of this like donut effect, where it comes up like this. And then the second that one comes up, you'll see the other one starting to grow, and then it pops, okay? If I push this back further, maybe it's too far, we get that kind of effect. Okay, if I push back even further, we get a little bit stronger, faster effect on there. Okay, now in some cases, I'm kind of losing that pop right at the end. It's kind of like going too fast. So I'm going to delete layer 1 again. I'm going to hit U. And I'm going to go to my keyframes, and instead of this being fast at the end, I'm going to push this back a little bit more. Maybe it's slow at the end. Let's see how that looks. There we go. Okay. Now I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to duplicate it again. Notice that this is automatically set. Because I set it the one time, it automatically remembers that, so it leaves it. And I'm just going to scoot that up a little bit. And I'm going to hit my workspace end there so I don't keep playing the entire thing. Oops. The top layer is still on, so let me turn the eyeball off. There we go. Much better, right? So depending on where those things are really helps control something like this. Now for this kind of effect, I need to have the entire screen covered at some point, okay? So I'm going to leave that the way it is, and then we will adjust it later. This is where this process comes in handy, because I know that I want to duplicate this, and let's say put, for silliness sake, one in each corner, and it kind of grows from the corner, okay? So I'm going to take both of these, and I'm going to do a pre-composition. Basically, I'm going to take these two layers and put them in their own composition that's kind of like at its own. Then I can, if I need to, double-click it, go into it, change stuff, and then come back and see the result of it, okay? I'll show you where it is in here for you lazy birds. Here's the pre-compose. Right there, pre-compose. Hotkey is Control-Shift-C, so Control-Shift-C is what I will use, and I will say bubble pop. I will move all the attributes into the new composition. I don't need to worry about this adjusting the composition duration, and I will hit OK. So now it looks like all those layers are gone. The animation is still there. Everything works exactly the way it did. But this has its own composition now. If I double click it, now I go back to this composition where I can edit that effect, okay? So I'm going to go back to my comp, I'm going to do some stuff here, and then I will adjust that later. So like I said, I'm going to put this in each corner. So I'm just going to duplicate, 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 and duplicate, And I'll even put one in the center there. That might be cool, right? Okay, so now if I rewind this and hit play, right, that's kind of a neat pattern. Now, at no point, though, does the entire screen get covered. I can verify that by going to my wire here, my transparency, and see that at no point is the entire screen covered and totally opaque. If I put a video behind this, I would see that transition when that video drops out and the new video pops in. So I'm going to go back to my bubble pop layer, and I'm just going to scoot this one down, and I'm going to do it further than I probably need to, and then I'll adjust it from there. Okay, back to Comp 1, and now you'll see this comes up, and then that grows and then pops. Okay, so let's make this work area a little bit bigger. Hit play. Awesome. I still need to cover these other areas where I don't have something in it. So I'm going to go to, let's say here, I'll duplicate this, and actually maybe I'll just duplicate this top one that I have and scale this up so that it fills the rest of it, and I'll put it behind it. Now if I rewind this and hit play, we get that. That is a cool transition, right? That looks pretty neat. We can fancy it up some more if we want. I don't have to have all of these be the same color. Whenever you deal with shapes, we don't have the solid settings. A solid is a solid, a shape is a shape. Those are two different things. If you want more information, watch my solids versus shapes video. Each one of these things is its own composition. Think of it like Photoshop. If you have a layer in Photoshop, how would you change the color of that layer in Photoshop? Anything. Anything. Right, name one. Hue Slider, perfect. Let's do that, okay? So, effect, color correction. Here's a whole list of things that you can do to change color inside of here, okay? Now, what I would recommend is don't use any change color ones, okay? A change color means basically I want to pick blue and change it to white. You get some weird stuff when we do motion blur. So what we want to do is slide the color. So Hue Slider is actually the perfect one to use for this. Here's hue and saturation, just like you would have inside Photoshop. And I've clicked on a random one. It doesn't matter which one I start with. And all I have to do is just slide the hue over. And you'll see, hey, now it's purple, right? Let's go to 50 here. And then what's cool is I can copy this effect, and then I can go to this layer and paste it, and then just change that number to, let's say, 100. Then go to this one and paste it, and go to 150, and then go to this one and paste it, and go to 200. It's beautiful. Okay, so there's my effect. Now at any point, if I wanted to adjust something, that's not a big issue. Like I said, I just jump to that bubble pop pre-comp, do whatever I need to do, and then those transitions will trickle into that other one, okay? Now this is going to be very important when we get to our hologram, when we get to our Angry Bird assignment or our parallax assignment or anything past this assignment. Understanding pre-compositions is essential. Think of a character you would have in a game or animation. We wouldn't want to have inside this composition 500 layers for that character and 50 layers for the background, and now we have two characters, so now we have an extra 500 layers. Everything goes into their own pre-compositions. Everything gets nicely nested together so that when we put them in here, it's its own little asset, okay? Just like when we do our hologram, we're going to have a bunch of different things that are animating. There's one for this one, there's one for this one, there's one for that one, and we kind of like are creating clips, basically, that we will then use. So you can think of this like, hey, I made a bubbly pop movie here like this, and then I took that movie and put it into another composition and then adjusted the coloring, okay? Now what's neat about this too is, like I said, I can go into the other one, shift the layers around. I could also shift keyframes around. So if I wanted to move keyframes left or right or whatever, it'll still go back into this. If I don't like how fast that's going, I just go into here, I go to my keyframes, and maybe I stretch this out some. Or I go into this one, and maybe I push this in more. I come back to this, and that effect is now done. Now if I were to have duplicated those two layers and done that 5 times, that's 10 times I have to go through each one of those and do those same settings, okay? With the pre-comp, everything is right there. Cool. What else was I going to do on this one? Oh, offset it, right? Typically, you like to have some offset. Sometimes you don't. Like this one, because of the pattern, I may not want it to be offset, but I want it to be offset, so I'm going to offset it. The back one will be the last one that goes, so I will scoot him over. There we go. And then I hit play. Don't be afraid as an animator to just play around with stuff, move stuff, shift things, move keyframes. Literally one frame over, one frame that way, 10 frames, 20 frames. Try stuff out. You may not realize it, but you are adding to your mental library of things that you can do and how things work in After Effects. Now, here's a tricky part, right? So what's the one thing that's missing from this? I had a list of things. Motion blur. Okay, so I go here, I go here, I go there, right? That's motion blur. I did easy ease already. On this one, I did easy ease. All right, so here's motion blur on, here's motion blur off. Do we notice a difference? Let's zoom in and see. So we should see blurriness, right? As things are moving, we should see blurriness. So motion blur off, motion blur on. Does anyone see a difference? No, we don't. Okay. So are any of these layers moving? Yeah, no. Correct. Not the actual layer. None of these are actually moving. Think of if I videotaped somebody running outside and there's, for whatever reason, no motion blur. I bring that in After Effects and I add motion blur. To After Effects, it's pixels. It doesn't realize that something is actually moving. Same thing here. This is just pixels that are just in a video. Where is it moving at? In the comp, in this bubble pop comp. So this is where I have to add motion blur, okay? So that might trip you up. As long as you know I need to look for motion blur, you'll know that it didn't work here. I'm going to find out where it does work. So I added here. You can see there's definitely motion blur on that, right? So now we come back to this one. There we go. And then we'll check for our parameters of how this thing is set up. So the start of this, nothing is on the screen. There is at least one frame where the entire screen is filled. And then everything goes away. Cool. So that is a successful one. So I will go to my project. I will go to Comp. And I will call this Bubble Pop Transition Final. Okay, and this is where I was talking about before. We have some that are not final. We have some that are final. The bubble pop is not final because that's just used as something, but the bubble pop transition is final. Now, if it helps you to organize your stuff, maybe having a final folder and having a pre-comp folder or a clip folder, feel free to do that too, okay? All right, I'm going to do one more, and then I'll let you play. The next one, I'm going to do very similar startup here with the Ellipse Tool. Now, if you don't like doing the finding the center, Control-Shift, dragging it out to create that circle, if you just double-click, it will do that, apparently. If you just double-click, not today, come on.
If you double-click on the screen, will it do it?
No, it should just work. Oh, I wasn't clicked in the comp, that's why. There we go. It didn't know where to put it. All right, if you double-click that after you've clicked on the comp, then it will create one the exact size of your composition. Here, it's stupid because my composition is rectangle, right? So not a big deal. I go to my ellipse, I go to my ellipse path, and then I change my stuff here. What is another way that I could do this? Okay. And then just scale it like that. No, we cannot do that, okay? And this is why we cannot do that. I will put this fill here, like red, sure. I'll get rid of this, and then I'll pull the stroke up. Okay, what do we notice about the stroke? It's not even. It's thicker on the top and the bottom and thinner on the sides because I scaled it in, okay? So you don't want to scale in this kind of thing. Anytime you do animation, not just in After Effects, everywhere, you want to have a reset value, an area where you can just say, I want to get this back to the default. By scaling it 57% or whatever it was, it doesn't get us back to that default. If I go dig through these menus here into the contents, into ellipse, into ellipse path, this I can set to 540. These are the exact numbers. That's the exact height of my composition, so it automatically fills it. It works perfect, okay? So that's what I want. So now all of my transitions and stuff down here are all back to default values. I didn't screw with any of those, okay? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of the fill. So I'm going to click on the word fill, click that off, and I'm going to make this stroke huge. Now as I scroll up with this number, what number do you think is going to be the one that fills it perfectly all the way to the center? $540, right? It's just a thing to pay attention to. My composition's height is 540, my circle is 540, so if my stroke's width is 540, it fills it perfectly. Okay, so if you had a composition that was 1,000, what would that fill width be to get it to fill perfectly? 1,000, right? So if you just know these like little tips along the way, it makes your life easier. It doesn't fill this. I don't care about that. I'll just make it a little bit bigger afterwards. I'll scale it up a little bit afterwards. Cool. Now, what I want to do is, we've seen those in the examples, like the swiping of it, like this little loop that would like wipe onto the screen. So I'm going to go to this add here, and this is one of the things that shape layers can do that solids cannot do. All of these things are different ways that we can add different effects to this stroke and how it gets written onto the screen. So I'm going to go to trim path. That's the one I want. And the way the trim path works is it has a start, it has an end, and it has an offset. So imagine that you have a perfect circle like we do. If I tell it where the start point is, it's going to move the start point around here. Okay, so 0 is right here for the start, and 100 is in the same spot right now. So it's a perfect closed circle. If I move the start point, it changes where that start point is. If I move the end point, it moves where the end point is. If it's a perfect circle and I do an offset, it just offsets the whole thing, which really doesn't do anything in this case, okay? But if my start and end are not at the same spot and I do an offset, it'll rotate it. Sometimes you will do a start, sometimes you will do an end, sometimes you will do a start and end, and sometimes you will do a start, end, and offset, okay? It doesn't work just for strokes, or for circles. You can do it for squares and whatever else. Think of, if you ever watched any VR, AR stuff, or you've seen commercials, sometimes they'll have like, you've clipped a coupon and the coupon dots are like moving around. Same kind of effect. That's how they would do something like that. So I'm just going to look at these and see which way it goes. So here's a start, so I just click and drag. Amazing. Here's the end. Okay. I like to go clockwise, so I'm going to go from 0 on the end to 100 in the start. Okay. So I'm going to just set a keyframe here. Scooch up a bit, set a keyframe there. I rewind, I hit play. There it is. Maybe that's a little bit too quick. There we go. Wonderful. Okay, so that's good. I would still do the same stuff with my easy ease, speed graph, and then control where this happens. And again, I think this is probably one that looks better when the speed happens at the front of it, because then we get this like fast, but then like a slowness that happens so we can kind of see what's actually going on. I could be totally wrong, but we'll find out. Nope, that looks awesome. Cool. I think I'm going to enhance that just a bit more. I think I should push that maybe a little bit further that way. There we go. All right, I like that. If I wanted it to go slower, I could even push it up a little bit further. Remember, we have 2 seconds, right? My last one was under a second, so I have plenty of time for this kind of thing if I desire. Cool. All right, I like that. Now, that could be one. I just need to scale it up a little bit here to, let's say, 105. There we go. And now it covers the entire screen. So again, this could be a transition. Just like the previous ones that we did, I can duplicate this, change the color, offset them, and we'll get the same kind of rainbowy effect. Just to quickly show you that, duplicate 5 times. I don't go to solid settings for this one, just like before. I go up here to the stroke color, and then I pick a different stroke color. So I'm going to go with that. I'll click on this one. Further down, I'll click on that one. There we go. And then a little bit of offset. There we go. So now we get this rainbowy effect. Motion blur goes on, this goes on. Cool. Okay, so now we get the wipe on. Obviously, I forgot to do the wipe off part. Now this is something that as I walked around Monday, I saw some people doing. If you've forgotten to do any part of the animation, I forgot to do easy ease, I forgot to do speed graph, it's quicker to just delete those 4 layers, do it on that one and reduplicate, than try to do it to each one of those layers, okay? So I'm going to delete that, I'm going to go to this one, and I need this to go away. Trim path, there it is. So to get it to go away, I'm going to go to my start this time, scoot up a bit, and then go here. Now you'll notice that it leaves a hair of it, even though we're at 100 and 100, it still leaves a hair of that just because of motion blur. Oops. So I'm going to go and easy ease this. I'm going to go into this and do the same speed graph on that. Okay. Same thing at the beginning. You'll see there's a hair of this showing. I'm just going to scoot this down to 1 frame. There we go. All right, and we'll get rid of that little hair later on. It's weird because it's like gone there, but then it comes back. Whatever. Cool. Now I could go again a little bit fancier on this too. Instead of just doing start, end, or end, start, whatever, I'll add offset to this too. And I'm basically just going to say at the very, very start of this, offset is on. And at the very end of this, offset is, I don't know, 360 maybe? We'll see what that does. So you'll see that it keeps it moving. Instead of it just being like a wipe and a wipe, it actually like keeps the whole thing kind of flowing around, which is pretty neat. Okay, so now that works. I could add speed graph to this. Some of these you don't need to always add speed graph to, especially if they're kind of like working together. So the start and the end have their own speed graphs. Those are individual things. But this offset is kind of working with them as well. I still do an easy ease on this. Oops. Preview it, see what it looks like. There we go. But if I start to go into here and I, let's say, push the speed of this all the way to the right, I might get some like funky results because of how the thing is animating. Because it might look like it's like speeding up all of a sudden right there at the end. You see it. Like all of a sudden it just goes zip and it like flies up to the top. Okay. So for this one, because it's added basically on top of another animation, I'm just going to do the easy ease. So I'm just going to basically just put that back to where it was, like this. Pretty close. There we go. Cool. All right, and that also fixed that, pretty much fixed the problem of the other one. So then I could go through this and I could duplicate it. And then I can go to the color and then just change the color. I'm not doing my little trick just for speed's sake. I'm just picking random colors that will wake you up. And just to really screw with you, let's go with a dark color at the end. Ugh, it's disgusting. I don't know what I did there. All right. Oh, I didn't offset them. It doesn't stop me from not doing that. And something like this, you may actually want to offset maybe 2 frames. Just keep in mind that we still have to have that 1 frame where everything is covered. There it is. And then everything goes away. It does. I would go with that. And then I have to do my backwards stair step. Okay, so the end animation, that's the wiping on. So the going away is this one, so that's what I'm going to move. I'm going to grab these three and just scoot that down. Grab these three, scoot that down. And you see I'm still under my 2 seconds. I actually have like, what, 4 frames, 5 frames left? Much better. There we go. A very annoying transition, but it's a transition nonetheless. All right, let me rename this one Barney Skittles. There we go, and we'll drop that into our composition. All right, now this is what, before I was talking about color correction and how we don't want to do a change color or change to color or something like that. After Effects also has adjustment layers, just like Photoshop does. So instead of me adding a hue and saturation, let's say, to each one of these layers, I can make an adjustment layer on top and affect the entire thing. I showed that in the title card. So under Effect, under Color Correction, here is a change to color. It's erased, there it is. Change color. The way this works is it says color to change. So if I go here and I say, okay, I don't want this to be yellow, and I drop the yellow, I could then use the transform to pick a different yellow. So I'm going to turn the motion blur off for a second, and you'll see I can switch what color that yellow is. Now the problem comes in when I turn motion blur back on. That yellow that I picked is no longer there in the entire thing because that yellow is now being blurred. So what happens is it blurs the yellow, then it does the picking of the yellow, and it's not picking up where those blurry areas are, okay? So that's where I would use a hue and saturation because all it's doing is taking those colors and just shifting them over, okay? So if I just did a effect, color correction, hue and saturation, this is a shifting, like a uniform shift. You'll see that it doesn't do that kind of weird thing, right? And I could still do things like I could go to color correction and go to, that's what I wanted. Why did I leave that? Hue and saturation, there we go. I can desaturate it. I can play with the lightness of it. I can still add a curves to this or levels. Right, and everything still works. Okay, you don't get any funky results typically with that, but with the other one you would. Now to make sure that at the very, very end of this that I don't have a weird line, I'm just going to go to the very end of all of these and just Alt left bracket it, and that'll just cut it so that the layer just disappears, okay? And so that way, once it does this, it goes in, then it's gone, okay? There's no layer right there. Cool. All right, so there's a couple extra techniques that you can utilize. This shape thing here, you can use rectangles, rounded, ellipses, polygons. I'd avoid the star tool. It's kind of like a weird one. If you found a specific use for it, sure, but everything else, keep them simple, like I said. They don't have to be crazy. They don't have to be like explosions of animations and stuff. Questions?